Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Very happy to see a full house, a small house, but a full one. And very happy to see very many known faces and contributors to this newly developing kind of a domain. And when you look at the panel, you can see we are looking at the services representation, we are looking at the civil domain, and particularly happy to have Mr. Stephane here, who is an expert from the Euroconsult. If you recollect, in the last session that SIA had organized, that is the DefSat, there was a similar session about civil-military fusion that happened. And incidentally, for the information of everyone, Dr. Giri had also carried out a study from NSCS as regards the differential between the space capabilities of India and China. And in that, he had particularly recommended that how we must go forward. So, as I would say that this session is not a beginning. This is a continuation of the dialogue that we've been having. And I would try to moderate the session in a manner as is comfortable to the speakers, but at the same time, would request the audience also to be participative. So I'll try and give a lot of opportunity to the people in the audience also, because of course, when I see you here, I see the interest and I know that you spared your valuable time and resources to be here. So, but while I give that time, may I request all of you to be a part of the solution and not the problem. You need to give constructive suggestions and feedback. And if there is something which you feel need not be spoken here, I am available. You can walk up to me and tell me even later. I thought I would start in a manner that I would have Marshal Bedi giving out his thoughts. Maybe I would request every speaker to take about 8 to 10 minutes, not more than that. Otherwise, we will run out of time. As it is, we are starting about 10 minutes late, Ayushi. And thank you, Ayushi, for getting us all here. And she is one of the young budding journalists in space sector. And in my first interaction here, she had put a question which I had answered, that people from humanities, why can't they get into this sector? And I said, it's a party, everyone is free to join. We have legal expert Dr. Ranjana Kaul here, and just a couple of days back we had another interesting session of how the US-Indian collaboration has happened in the recent visit of the Prime Minister, about the Artemis Accord especially. So that is another point which I would request anyone here wanting to contribute, or if you want to clarify your mind, none other than Dr. Kaul here sitting in the audience. So with that, Marshal Bedi, may I request you to start.
Thank you very much, sir, for this opportunity. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. What I am going to speak is, of course, based on my experience of service, which essentially was not focused on space because it wasn't so frequently talked about domain, and plus the few things that I picked up during the last 2 days here itself and in the earlier conferences. What we are going to talk about is essentially integration of national military power and civilian capabilities. Now, the civil-military fusion is nothing new. We have been talking of civil-military integration ever since I was myself a youngster in the Air Force. But there is a subtle difference. Those days, when we talked of civil-military cooperation, it essentially meant civil bureaucracy. That means there was a military and there was a civilian government. So just about everything in the nation was controlled by ministries, some ministry or the other. So when Air Force or any army or armed forces had to deal with the civilian things, they essentially had to deal with ministries. So focus used to be how to interact with civilian counterparts. But now the focus has shifted. And path-breaking technologies are now no more the prerogative of only military. You know, there are dual-use technologies, and today when we talk of civil-military fusion, we are essentially talking of actually civilian life and what happens in civil. Yesterday or day before, Chairman ISRO said that actually the entire focus earlier has been on science and science and science. They did not convert science into business really. But now there are commercial applications, and you know, everyone talks of SpaceX. What has SpaceX done? It has reduced the launch cost, so it has become famous. It's launched thousands of satellites and planning to launch a couple of more thousands. We learned that there are 100 plus startups in the space sector here only, and as the economy is projected, India will become 5% of the world's $1 trillion economy, or will be 1% of Indian projected GDP of $5 trillion. So both these figures coincide to say that it will be about $50 billion economy from the today's about between 1 or 2 billions. So how is it going to grow really if defense is not going to be part of it? So how will become defense part of it? Okay, in this limited time, I will talk of certain operational aspects that how this civil military fusion in space it can help the Air Force or armed forces in general improve its operational capability. And why is it important? You know, certain specific applications I will talk, take ISR, you know. In ISR, particularly the imaging. Now this imaging sector, we have seen the contribution or the share of EO satellites vis-a-vis communication satellites. Just about everybody is using broadband or phones. Every second man on the street is not buying maps. So what happens is the upstream or the uplinking to downlinking market, as far as the maps are concerned, is not very much commercialized. The only customer is the military. Now, if people are going to launch more of EO satellites, then who's going to be the customer? We have to think about it, because unless that customer base increases, there isn't going to be much lucrativeness in launching too many EO satellites. Now, how can that happen? I have a feeling that, you know, like take the software industry, the way IT has picked up, and we talk of cyber warriors now. Today, any armed forces need some software application, and it runs out of its own people. You can go outside and literally hire software professionals. But that is not the case in image interpreters. You know, today we are talking of, in the last DevSet, the military, I mean, they were demanding 1 hourly visit, that, you know, we need 1 hourly visit of our satellites. We have just bought, Reapers are coming, and 30 hours is the time it can stay in the air. Now, what is it going to do for those 30 hours? It will inundate you with so much data and so many images. And if I have satellite visiting every hour, I mean, let's say we have so many of them, who's really going to interpret those images? I mean, will the armed forces generate their own resources to be sitting there 24/7? What will happen is that for the lack of those image interpreters, a lot of data will go waste, or you will not be able to harness this data which this space sector is going to throw. So you need to educate people. Yeah, educational sector we keep talking of. You know, everything focuses on how to launch a satellite. Somebody makes a small satellite, it's of course required. But can we educate people in these disciplines? Can the universities or IITs or diplomas even can start courses on image interpretation? What will happen with that is that, yes, you are creating a capability in general, you know, civilian domain, which when the time comes can be used by the military. You know, we talk of aircraft, you know, everything is required to be dual use. I wonder if the aircraft were only military aircraft, how much of aviation industry would have grown if it did not have the passengers carrying potential. So if tomorrow I need suddenly, you know, war breaks out and there are millions of images and I want them interpreted quick time, what do? I wish I have that capability available in the civil domain, like we have civil transport available. Tomorrow you need to carry troops, you need to carry logistics, just about anything can be tasked for. So you need to have cyber warriors and space warriors, okay? You have these disciplines coming, Agniveers have started, etc. We will do good in case, these people were to be trained in civil before they join, that somebody is trained in some kind of image interpretation. And how will it increase market? Because when schools and colleges and universities start using these images, they may not be military grade images, they need not be centimetric sort of resolution, but the demand increases. That means every new month, every new week, I need more images just to train people. So if that market increases, probably people will find it lucrative to launch more EOS satellites. Your planning needs to be together. What happens is, today morning I read that in space, as a demanded expression of interest for SSLV launch capability, they are going to transfer technology. Now, let's say I show expression of interest that I want to acquire this capability. What is my end market? I mean, is there a vision with the military that, okay, how many satellites would you like me to launch and with what kind of payload? I mean, what are you really looking for? So unless that planning starts together between civil and military, your end is not really clear. What happens is, we acquire a capability and then we start looking at how to use it. We don't tend to build capability with a vision that what exactly is required. Okay, now come to NAVIC. Everybody, we are talking of PNT, developing local PNT. NAVIC or navigation or PNT is not only for going from place A to place B. I am looking at that my weapon systems, terminal guidance is based on PNT. I have IN GPS guidance for my weapon systems. If homegrown BrahMos or any Agni missile or anything, if its terminal guidance is based on GPS and I do not have control over that GPS, I mean, $1 million missile is waste if it cannot reach the target. So if today DF-15 or DF-21 claim that they have achieved, they have improved accuracy, probably their confidence in Bedu system. So we need to develop these kind of capability from that point of view, that my weapon systems need this PNT accurate information, that if I need to be really Atmanirbhar in making weapon systems, that I need Atmanirbharta in terminal guidance also, and not only in creating that hardware or software. Come to SSA, space situational awareness. Now it is not only to monitor your satellites. The moment civilian market starts increasing their satellites in the space, who's going to guard those satellites? I mean, will you be able to look after your satellite in space all by yourself? You will need military to do that. So you will need to provide space situational awareness to the military for your own cause, not really to monitor cartosats only of the military, but your whole plethora of your satellites that you are going to launch. So big players, we say, need to get in. Yesterday, a lot has been said that you don't only depend on startups. When you talk of startup, certain images come in your mind, some 20-year-old guys, cash-starved, looking for funding, etc. In my opinion, startup is of an idea, not starting up of life. So if I'm 60-year-old, I can very well do a startup because I'm starting up with an idea. But who will looking at me fund me? Okay, so what happens is, you need big guys or big conglomerate, these business houses coming in and supporting startups or doing startups themselves. I mean, if today L&T, they say their PSLV fabrication it is involved in, but when it comes to SSLV, you will find only startups, some people coming up. So let the big business house say that I am doing a startup in this particular thing, which kind of gives it a flip. Now, trust has to be built up. I believe, this NRO, that National Reconnaissance Office of States, has done millions or billions of dollar contract with Maxar, Planet or Black Sky for their imaging, basically, because they think that only Air Force cannot do with the kind of imaging intelligence or the analysis which is required. Even PLA Rocket Force, I believe, it started, getting in private players into their rocket force management. We need to do the same. If civilians need to do what government needs to do, transparency. Now, I believe Indian Space Policy 2023 has been talked about much. I would say that, like, they say justice should not only be done, it must appear to have been done. The transparency in something should at least be transparent. People have a lot of apprehensions about this space policy, because they say that, in space or NSIL, okay, is supposed to be looking after interests of the civilian market in competition with ISRO, but they are controlled by DOS, and Secretary DOS and Chairman ISRO is the same person. So there is going to be a conflict of interest. There may not be. I'm not at all saying, let's say in space and NSIL swear by God and say that we want to be transparent, but will the commercial sector or civilian people believe them on the face of it? That will it happen? That kind of trust needs to be got in. And in the end, I would say that, we need to together build up capability. There is a famous statement after Kargil, with General Malik responded to a journalist, and he said, we will fight with what we have. I think this needs to change to that we will have with what we want to fight. Thank you very much, ladies.
Thank you, Marshal Bedi. Very well put. And while I invite Mr. Stephane, as you take the stage, I just wanted to highlight very valid points, many of them brought out by Marshal Bedi. Space warriors is one, transparency in the space policy is required. The nation needs to definitely give niche technology and resources to the armed forces. Many more points. I think we will get to that when we open it up to you. So over to you, Mr. Stephane.
Thank you very much, General. So I come pretty much from the commercial world. My company, Euroconsult, advises organizations in the space market on strategy, on demand trends, on whether their business plans will make money or not. Defense is always in there as one of the vertical markets. For us, it's a vertical market. For the commercial operators, it's a vertical market. It's out there between, along with media, energy, mining, transportation, and so on. It's not just any vertical market, and because it's critically important, because there's a lot of money involved also, and because the requirements are clearly not the same. I won't talk about the Indian situation, but more generally, let me walk you through maybe the three main phases that the industry has gone through in dealing with the defense world. Historically, there were civilian satellites on this side, military satellites on that side. The military stuff was behind a green curtain, and it was all very mysterious, and there was an airtight separation between the two. Then Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. And America had to deploy massive amounts of troops. They came with massive amounts of communications, massive for the day, and the military satellites were absolutely, completely swamped. And then Saddam Hussein did something again, and even more troops came into the Iraqi theater this time, and even more communications came along, and this time there were UAVs, and everything was swamped, and DoD, which was the big player, still is the big player in money terms, and in terms of the volume of equipment, said, okay, we're gonna go commercial. Because that's where the megahertz are. An interesting discussion began between the military customer and the civilian operators. The civilian operators had a lot of resources, but they are used to things like predictability in the contract. If you drop on me at the last minute and ask for lots of megahertz, I'm gonna have to give you a spot price, which will be high. And maybe I won't have planned my capacity for you. The dance was a bit painful. The military customers became used to paying big amounts of money, but then of getting the capacity quickly, and walls and barriers began falling. By that time, the Cold War was over. NRO had been declassified. A lot of things that were taboo before had become regular. I remember the NRO people being all giddy just by being able to say who they were working for, and the conversation evolved with the civilian world saying, okay, we have to adapt to your contracting procedures, to your particular requirement, to your security requirements. We'll get the clearances. And by the way, tell us what you need for the future so we can build for you. blank faces on the other side of the table where I cannot tell you where I'm going to go to war in the future. Nobody knows that. And that the prices that the military side learned how to negotiate prices better, so things adjusted. Little by little, it emerged that, yeah, the commercial deals were actually pretty good deals. That if you knew how to play it, you could get capacity at lower prices than on your exquisite satellites that delivered maybe not 100% of the military capability, but say 80%. And in the meantime, from the ground up, from the troops, came a cry that we don't need 100%. We never get to see, and this from the platoon leaders and the lieutenants and the guys who were actually doing the fighting, we never get to see the NRO imagery because we don't have the clearances. Give us civilian stuff that we can use. And it appears that it's easier to get, and it does most of the job. And the warfighters by that time also had pretty good civilian equipment, smartphones were coming, so Google Maps was there. They were not getting that from the classified side. Now we are in phase 3. I think both sides are pretty much comfortable with each other. All of the commercial operators, all of the serious commercial operators have integrated the defense requirements. The defense world has gotten used to what the commercial operators can deliver. And another thing happened along the way, which is constellations. For its own reasons, the commercial world developed proliferated constellations of communication and observation satellites. Number one, they give better coverage, repetitivity, and so on. Number two, they were resilient, which was not a requirement really on the commercial side, but is definitely a requirement on the defense side. And now, phase 3B, if you will, but the defense space operators are starting to look at their own constellations, which would maybe come on top, maybe come alongside, maybe be integrated with the commercial constellations. It's a complete change of paradigm from just 20 years ago. There are also exquisite capabilities now on the commercial side. A lot of the things that were mysteriously happening behind the curtain now have been totally demystified. What was going on in those ISR rooms? Well, now we know. It's nothing. It was real-time, high-resolution imagery. We can buy that from the commercial market. Even geolocation and ELINT are becoming available on the commercial market. There's probably some military capabilities that will always have to be military, anything associated with strategic forces. So nuclear communications, there's no reason why that would be commercial. EMP resilience, maybe the commercial world will come to that at some point. Now that there have been cyber attacks against commercial systems like the Viasat satellite in Europe, that has given a jolt to a few people. Everybody is beefing up their cyber capabilities. SIGINT, I think that's probably not going to, legally it's not possible to do it on the commercial side. It's a very important military capability, military civilian intel capability. Not everybody has it, and it's going to stay on that side. But it's not it's not the main aspect. I would say there's also a flux in the other direction. The military in a lot of places is realizing that it also increasingly often has to execute civilian missions. I met the Australian, the top Australian space, military space officer recently, and he said, incredible, now we have to take on firefighting. Australia is dealing with huge wildfires. The military has to be mobilized. It used to be a civilian mission. Now it's part of the military portfolio. A lot of missions like maritime domain awareness and going after dark ships, dark vessels that turn off all identifiers and now have to be tracked with a mix of radar and geolocation. Things that would have to be to call entirely unclassified assets just 10 years ago. No, you can do that on the civilian side. And is that a civilian mission? If it's protecting the fishing zone, is that a military mission? Who knows what's on those vessels, where they come from, why they don't want to be identified? It's both at the same time. And that's typically one area where there are civil-military fusion cells and complete integration between the two. If somebody attacks your PNT system, it disrupts the banks, it disrupts the civilian infrastructure, which is what you guys in uniform are there to defend, right? So in that case, you are on the same page with the security officers at the bank and with a whole slew of civilian operators. And this is where the military and the banking vertical markets come together. And their needs have to be taken into consideration, and their use of satellite systems have to be put on the same page, and that there is no question that there is integration. And I would say on some of what the things that the Air Marshal mentioned in imagery interpretation, I'm sure that's been, all those analysts looking at light tables have been an increasing burden because there are more and more imagery coming. How are you going to deal with that? So 20 years ago, the DoD started visiting video service providers because those guys were used to ingesting vast numbers of video feeds at the same time. They had the technology so that one person could monitor 20 screens. That sort of things. Now, all of that is available more on the civilian, on the commercial, on the civilian side. This is where the AI tools are being developed. This is where the big machine learning systems are being trained with the larger volumes of data. All of that technology is, of course, at the disposal of the ISR community, and it flows both ways, by the way. There's a lot of talent that is trained on the defense side, which then flows to the startups. Let me conclude with that. We heard from the Israeli ambassador this morning, and he mentioned that they have a lot of startups, including in space. All of those guys, no, all, I don't know, but a lot of those guys, their formative years were with Unit 8200, which is the Israeli SIGINT capability. This is where the big computers are. This is where they get trained on talent. And then when they retire from service, they go work for companies on the startup side. And there's in the 60s, it was a revolving door. Let's look at it positively. And it's a cycle. May I point out also, maybe in conclusion, that your friends northeast of here have are not creating any barriers between their civilian and military space sites. They have a thriving commercial space industry. It's completely at the service of the Communist Party and the PLA. And they integrate those requirements. It's for them domain market, and anyway, they cannot. There's no way they could do anything by just restricting themselves to the civilian side. It's a constraint for them because then there's a lot of foreign markets they cannot go to. So there has to be enough money on the table for them to be interested. But as a result, you have one Ministry of Defense which has 20 satellite observation constellations at their disposal. They can bring that to bear in diplomatic relationships as well. There's a lot. Once you integrate both worlds, you can go see your allies around the world and say, I have this capability. Would you like that to include that in our bilateral cooperation? It gives you, when you walk into military exercises, when you go meet your counterparts in the US, you can play at a pretty high level. Now, it's not just about providing a few ships for the exercise. You can provide ISR. You can provide resilient communications in circumstances where those are needed. It puts you, it gives you a better seat at the table, and there are deals available then from the strategic partners. When you start doing that, it's not a bad place to be. I've always observed that to be a key but completely unspoken aspect of developing ISR capabilities. The imagery is something you can trade with the others. It's less and less because everybody has imagery now, but it's not to be neglected. Okay, so I think I've probably more than exhausted my time. I'll be happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Stephane. And while Dr. Giri takes the stage, there are a lot of important issues which came up, and I'm sure in the audience you picked up. He spoke of EMP resilience, he spoke of critical infrastructure, that is the satellites to be considered in that particular manner, the use of cyber and the ability to protect that. And one more interesting point which was quite common to what Marshal Bedi said, and Stephane gave an example of the human capital which comes out of Israel and the SI and the signal intelligence part, which is not commercially available off the shelf and it is very customized. And there are people in the audience who would be very interested. So what is the good example from Israel, because of the conscription and what Marshal Bedi said about Agniveer, that is for people like us to give shape. It doesn't fall from heaven in a manner that you can use it. So how do we shape it? That is for all of us to see. So with that, let's see what Dr. Giri has to speak.
Thank you very much, sir. I'm Marshal Bedi, Mr. Stephane, esteemed audience. I am here filling in for my friend Sai Krishna, although he might have spoken on an entirely different orbit. His expertise has been in cybersecurity of critical infrastructure, and I'm missing him here. But what I bring to the table is what sort of financial mechanisms are available and why should we look at these mechanisms quite seriously. We came here this morning. By the roadside you might have seen people cleaning the streets and cleaning your alleys and lanes and whatnot. That's your New Delhi Municipal Corporation. What's their annual budget? Nearly 5,000 crores. An emerging city, a city that was a small town, a beautiful town. People loved it for its good food, especially chaat. They now love it for its cleanliness, and perhaps it is the upcoming IT hub, Indore. 7,000 crores. Chennai, 4,000 crores. Ahmedabad, 9,000 crores. Mumbai, 52,000 crores. That's the annual municipal corporation budget. What is that money being used for? We are just using it for cleanliness, for drainage systems and whatnot. Half of it doesn't get worked out. It's always in a under construction phase. Massive sums lying unutilized. Who's utilizing it? Mr. Stephane just said the unconventional ways that China funds itself when it very well knows that nobody's going to come and fund its strategic systems. We've started the space challenges, Ministry of Defense, well and good, and there is a very exhilarating participation that has come. People, startups have really lapped this opportunity up, and perhaps there will be another set of challenges. Looking at the success of defense def space challenges, ISRO is now contemplating 100 challenges. Why just 75? Let's go for 100. But would that suffice? I don't think so, because as I said yesterday, those who have heard me, beyond $15 million, there is nobody who's gonna fund your startups once they achieve that level of maturity. Where would that money come from? Anything that is supporting your strategic systems, would you be comfortable anybody else funding it? I don't think so. You'll have to keep it closely guarded. Not only the tech that they are building, but also their finances. Because at the end of the day, you might cultivate nice startups led by young, promising, starry-eyed kids. You'll give them good coverage in the media. They'll come on cover pages of great magazines and everything. And suddenly one fine day you'll find that the beneficial ownership patterns of the startups that they've created, that you've called that, okay, these are Indian startups, they no more are Indian. They're getting contracts from somewhere else. And wherever they're getting contracts from, they're getting married to them eventually, right? Their entire commitment, their deliverables, their projects, their products are for them. You haven't been giving them great business. So wherever the great business lies, their affinity goes over there. So this is the reality of today. Nobody's speaking of it. I'll leave it to your comprehension and deciphering. But yes, this is what is happening. It's very early for us to make a comprehensive analysis. Conferences like these give us the opportunity to do that. But lessons should be learned as early as possible. And if you look at I don't need to tell the defense gathering over here the geostrategic environment. It is rapidly changing. It might tilt in our favor, it might not tilt in our favor. And in such circumstances, when the world is migrating into Industry 4.0 as well as Space 2.0 simultaneously, you must make sure that a lot of tech remains closely guarded. I don't say that there's no scope for international cooperation. I'll be speaking on international cooperation this afternoon. But there are certain areas where I wouldn't say secrecy, but privacy is needed. You need, your ISRO tech has been built in close gated colonies. Some of that will have to be continued. Yes, there will be arenas where you'll have to cooperate with others, and that should happen. One of the great things that have happened recently is the Artemis Accords. But that's a different ball game. When we talk about civil-military fusion, we have to start mobilizing our own financial resources. So what do we learn from our neighbor in the north? Tianjin municipal government, city, not even, I mean, nobody knows cities beyond Shanghai and Beijing, most of them. Tianjin deploys nearly $350 million only for innovation fund, a municipal innovation fund. Guangzhou, we've been seeing images of Guangzhou, beautiful city, really tall buildings, there's a river flowing, very pretty, very brightly lit, everything. You see them on Instagram reels. TikTok is not available these days, but you see them. Pretty city. $300 million investment fund, innovation investment fund. What does the municipal corporation get out of it? Jobs. What does it get out of it? Taxes, revenue for it. So what is the motivation factor for the municipal corporations? Perhaps, I mean, in China, there's no scope for getting votes, but here we do have that. Our political parties do contest municipal elections quite vociferously and vehemently. Why isn't that an agenda? This is your own capital. Get it deployed and make the most out of it. And you can definitely employ people who would look after the fund, who would look after who will scout startups, who will make sure that these startups do well. And eventually it is in everybody's interest. It is in the city's interest that you are getting high quality jobs. That leads to, a lot of, secondary, like the IT did to a lot of cities, Hyderabad, Bangalore, Pune. The same way, space economy will also give a fillip to our city economies. And that's how we should be looking at civil-military fusion. There is a requirement, of course. Your end user at the end of the day will be your defense and intelligence agencies. But those who are innovating will always be from the civilian side of things. And what they will always need is finances. It shouldn't be the case that absence of finance, absence of money, or blockages in the pipelines should lead to their innovation getting slowed down. That can't happen. You have to make sure that the pipe is flowing continuously, the water is flowing, and you'll have to mobilize DC capital. This is the second day I'm saying that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Giri, and very relevant points. And before I make a comment on that, just wanted to quickly ask, is there anybody who's an IS officer in the gathering or an IS aspirant? Okay. Specifically, what Dr. Giri has mentioned is how a nation which is rising has to cater for budgeting. And in that, he has linked it to the governance part. There is a plethora of funds lying somewhere, which possibly should be used for not the immediate goals of feel-good factor, but for a long-term nation growth. And in nation growth is the feel-good factor. And this is the same point he had mentioned even in the previous session in DefSat. And he had given very good examples. And I would urge all of you to please go on YouTube. That session is very much there. And I can't repeat all of those here, but particularly with that emphatic repetition of that, it is relevant. And why has Dr. Giri mentioned this? I mentioned initially that he had jointly done a study with us, and we had presented that study to the 3 service chiefs and the CDS. And what was the concluding remark from the apex level? We don't have funds. So there is always a dichotomy. Somebody says there's no dearth of funds, and when it comes to getting onto it, you suddenly realize there are no funds. But he's pointed out that in a nation, funds are available. How is it to be planned is for the people in the governance and people at the apex level who have to make funds available. Otherwise, we all are saying this is critical infrastructure. Why are we saying it's a critical infrastructure? You look at every government, successive government has been saying that we need road, rail, aircrafts, airports. And what about satellites now? That's as much a critical infrastructure for your growth, development and security. Without that, the country will be left behind. So that is something which was extremely relevant, and with that I am opening the question session. And yes, before I do that, one more point. When you say Make in India, yesterday Mr. Rohan Verma, who's sitting here in the first row, Map My India, young entrepreneur, he made a very valid observation. He said his ambition is not only make in India, it is make for the world. And he changed that to make for the nation. Whether you go in the region, whether you go into international defense cooperation, essentially you are reaching out to the world, and that is what is defense cooperation. If you are not able to think beyond what is given by the government, I think we will go around in circles and keep blaming each other. So I am opening the floor. Please raise your hand, give out your name, which organization are you representing, in case you are representing, otherwise we are still okay with that. It is said backbenchers always sleep, but backbenchers have raised their hand first. Yes, the last row please.
Hi, this is Arin from Inspacity and IIT Bombay. So among many questions, the primary one that comes to mind is, as a new startup, or I'm hoping there are startup founders here, what would be the key takeaway that you would say that we need to put in our strategies to ensure the civil and military fusion is kind of set in the coming years and we continue to flourish like that?
You know, for a startup, the most important thing is don't talk of high sounding words, get your action plan right. Leave the strategy to the people who are already in business. You just make a workable action plan by milestones you will achieve. But all the same, I will pass on the question to Dr. Giri because he represents the civil side on the stage, and I will also ask Stephane to take this on.
What was the question? Strategy. Okay. First thing I'd like to say is make sure that your product portfolio is entirely dual use so that you can get customers from both the ends. I see 3, if you remember sets that we studied in mathematics, I see 3 sets that have emerged in the past 4 years, since 2019, since the emergence of DSA. You have a military space program now. Nobody speaks of it openly. You have a military space program with its own set of requirements. You have a civilian space program which is led by ISRO beautifully. And then you have a commercial space program that you are part of. Now you have one leg in the military side, you have one leg in the civilian side. And at times you might get contracts from here, at times you might get contracts from the other end. ISRO is yet to sort of learn how to give out contracts with NSIL in hand, but definitely there is great interest, as you have seen, noticed in DevSpace. You have been one of the beneficiaries of DevSpace. So make sure that you have dual use portfolios.
Well, it's a pretty broad question. I'd say you don't have, first of all, necessarily to sell in the defense market. You can be perfectly happy just staying on the commercial side. If you sell lollipops, you can have a defense version with a steel handle, but the MOD can be perfectly happy buying the commercial version. In some cases, some products have to be totally militarized because there's no demand on the On the civil side, that can happen as well. There's a lot of companies that operate 100% in the defense and intelligence sector. Defense and intelligence not being the same market or requirement sets, by the way. But it's every company is different. Everybody writes his strategy with his key markets in mind, and things can change over time.
Okay, next question. You could get the mic. Colonel Anand wants to ask a question. And in the meantime, I'll tell you, this is not only relevant about, here, first row please. It's not only relevant about the startups having a strategy. I can assure you that a very senior officer from the Air Force is here. When private companies, big giants come here, they're only looking at the defense sector, and we've been telling them there's plenty of space in the civil sector as well. Look at helicopter demand. Why are you keen only to sell to the Indian Air Force or to the Indian Army or Navy? Why don't you look at the hill sector, the mountainous areas where movement is so difficult? So that's not a particular binding problem only of the startups who are small players. Even at the larger level, the same mindset does bog down people. Yes, Kanlan.
Sir, I have got a comment to substantiate what Professor Chaitanya said, and two recommendations. What Chaitanya said is right. I remember I attended the ISPA symposium where you were also there, and there was a startup who had sold his startup twice, and he became a venture capitalist. So this we need to be very careful about. And there's you have initiatives like Index X. It's fine, you know, all the photo ops and all, but we have to ensure that we don't get bought out. Coming on to funding aspect, like I'm heading the aerospace division in the Department of Defense Production. We are quite open to, you know, Make 2 has been the preferred route, but now we're very open to Make 1. Make 1 is, as you are aware, government funding. So we have interacted with a lot of space startups and all. And so if there are recommendations coming, so we are putting a lot of projects from Make 2, for example, HAPS, you know, the high altitude pseudo satellite, which now is going from Make 2 to Make 1. So what we need is a prioritized action plan, as you also said regarding the funds. And I firmly believe that for niche technologies, especially in the space and the aerospace domain, the government has to take ownership, and Make 1 should be the route, because then sir, we'll have marching rights and everything with us. And the second thing is in the Chintan Shiva, which was we had organized in the MOD, even the DRDO, niche technologies, sir, this is a recommendation for you to take it to the highest people in the land, that to develop niche technologies, we cannot have the L1 model. You know, this L1 model needs to get out of the way, and from the IFA angles, from the financial advisors, if we can do away with it, because various countries in the world, including US, where DARPA has played a major role. So especially if the niche technology in the aerospace and the defense domain, we need to get out of the L1 model. Thank you.
Thank you, Colonel Anand. And incidentally, just for the information of the people who are in the audience, Colonel Anand is working as a specialist in the Ministry of Defense. So anybody who is wanting advice, please meet him. And I thought only, and he is my student, I thought the teachers give homework to students, but he's given me a homework that apex level I have to sensitize people. Anyway, that's it. Next question, anybody please raise your hand. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Pranav.
Okay.
I come from the Council for Strategic and Defense Research.
Please speak loudly, we will not be able to hear.
Yeah, I come from the Council for Strategic and Defense Research. My question is a little bit more fundamental regarding to civil-military fusion. Now, in 2019, we set up the DSA, and then we set up DSRO, which is now integrated to some DRDO itself. But at a more fundamental level, have we thought about what kind of a space power, as a military space power, we want to be? We talk about acquiring commercial capabilities, but why? The fundamental question, I mean, you said strategy, leave it to the military, but also because it's civilian budgets, a lot of civilian inputs have to go into answering why do we need to buy so many capabilities. And especially some things like we have a SSLV. What is the utility of an SSLV as a rapid launch capability, given it's a solid rocket booster? Have we thought about these in a fundamental level, sir? Because as a civilian who looks at the aerospace doctrine, who looks at the role of DSA, I do not get the sense of clarity that there is a coherent strategic thought behind it.
The entire roadmap, the entire journey has been thought out. You may have a fundamental query which I will clarify to you separately. Please meet me separately. We have been in this business where the draft CCS note was prepared by us. We know exactly in which direction we are going to take defense space. And when the Prime Minister announced that there is a liberalization in which he himself took a video conference, and Rohan Verma was a part of that along with his father. The government is very clear on its intent, what is strategic, what is less strategic, what is peculiarly defensive, where privacy has to be ensured, security has to be ensured. So if there is a fundamental doubt, I will walk you through that entire journey and tell you how it is done. Please meet me separately. Just a minute. Ayushi, I think we'll need 10 minutes more if you're okay with that. Okay? Right.
Why should the military go to the commercial side? Say it's you have to be pragmatic. It's either to save money or to gain access to capabilities that would take you too much time to develop organically. If you're not satisfied with that, then don't go to the commercial side. Apart from that, every country can follow its own path. There's no reason to emulate a foreign power because that's what they've done. If I may be so presumptuous as to give a bit of advice to the military side, however, the Air Marshal was the one to use the word transparency. The commercial world likes to take your requirements into account, but the budgets need to be planned, technology needs to be planned. A little bit of visibility and transparency help in that respect. Overclassification is very often a problem. It's in everybody's way. There's good reasons why stuff gets classified, but sometimes it hinders the capabilities that could be put to your disposal. Then they can be developed in a bespoke manner, but they will be more expensive. Points of contact also. Some militaries have developed shops purely as an interaction with the commercial world. You can go in there, the door is open, you don't have access to everything, but you have somebody that you can talk to. The military presence at this conference is an excellent thing because then we can interact, but some things maybe could be more systematized. You don't have to be open to everybody, foreign players, for instance, who come in, but a bit of openness in that case can work wonders. In fact, we find that a lot of the capabilities that were highly classified before had no particular reason to be classified because now they are available in the commercial world. It's not so much what you can observe, for instance, it's what you do observe. So you don't have to tell anybody that I'm watching this objective today at this particular point in time, but the way it's the sensors turn out to be nothing magical. Once that was brought into the open, more sensors came out, more technology was put at the disposal of the warfighters at the end of the day.
Thank you, Mr. Stephane. Yes, please. Second row. Yeah.
Good morning, sir. Sir, I'm Commander Siddharth Dubey. I'm working with Hughes with some 15 years of SATCOM experience, half of it in the civil, in corporate side, and half of it in the military side. Sir, on the fusion part, I feel the HR capital is most important. And towards this, if Ambar Dubey can become JS of civil aviation and then go back to the corporate side, I do feel that there is a need to have a structured scenario where even if one continues to be on the private side, we can as individuals contribute towards this fusion policy. Thank you, sir.
I agree with you entirely, and Ambar Dubey's example is perfect, absolutely perfect. And I'm sure people from the services take note of this because if you need expertise in a compressed time frame, then you got to take an expert. So human resource policy, human resource provisions, unless we sort it out ourselves in-house, I don't think we are going far. And one more point here itself, I want to tell the civil sector, you need mentors. Please don't use them as agents. You need veterans to be taken as mentors. But the moment you start looking at them and telling them to go on a wild goose chase and get orders, no, I think absolute poor utilization of the 30, 40 years of expertise, and you have a veteran here who says he spent half his life in uniform and half his life in the civil sector, who better than him can give you strategic guidance? So I think on both sides, I've made my point clear. I think we have just time enough for one or two questions, particularly fond of the backbencher. Please. Last one.
So, a very good morning to all of you, and my sincere regards to the senior officials here. And I completely endorse Dr. Giri's statement that the economies get scaled up once the employability from the states are there. So the economies scale up as a game changer when the employability comes. But my submission is that the public fund is basically from the consolidated fund, and I am a serving group captain, and I also have a corporate experience. And unless your manuals like DPP and DPM, the revenue and the capital procurement changes, which would take decades, and I would not say that, because unless it changes, the L1 remains as L1. You won't have H1 as the innovation partner of yours. So my submission to you is that the people who are aspiring to be aligned to taking the, or being the vendors, have to either have a kind of a MDP or a course with the veterans or with the people, so that they get aligned to what is it and they do not lose out on the contracts. Because
absolutely correct. I think you have a very valid point.
And
this is exactly what is collaboration and hand-holding. Unless the people who have got to design things for you, unless they understand the end product is either going to be late, costly, or never going to be available. So I endorse that view, and there is possibly a requirement for the services also to work on two fronts. Firstly, I have personally experienced that the problem statement which is written out by the services is hardly ever understood in its totality by the industry, because the moment you start using adjectives and adverbs and you go into a small example, if let us say one of us were to write seamless integration, what is seamless? Unless you give me the band, unless you give me the frequency, a word like seamless integration, top and bottom. What is top and bottom? How does the industry understand that? So just for your information, we are already working at our training establishments to see, and in coordination with CII or SIDM, we are trying to see what is the language which will be understood. And your point is clear, nobody should be missing out on contracts. So that's absolutely correct. One point here about transparency, it's an excellent idea, but when we in uniform look at our adversaries, finally it is for us to conceal what we want to conceal, and if you want to fool him and give out something else, please do that. Yeah. This incidentally will be the last question, please.
Thanks for giving me the opportunity. I think I heard, Air Marshal Bedi, I heard Chaitanya, and I heard you, sir. I have been with, as a technology provider, as a technologist for 2 decades in ISRO. When I came out of ISRO to build something for the defense and the civil market, I think when I was on the other side of, as a technology provider and, trying our hands and with the best people in ISRO, defense was our customer, civilians were our customers, and there was a trust. When I am on this side, I think there is still some trust factor problem. That I understand. Chaitanya, Professor Chaitanya told money is in there, but it's not coming that easy. I think there is a trust deficit that as a civilian, as a startup, as I completely sync with Air Marshal Bedi, that startup, at this age, we are not, we can't say it as a startup, we are actually experts, we can provide it. But what do you think, General Khandare, where do we stand in terms of the trust that the defense in the uniform people are actually trusting the people who are actually now providing this?
See, I will make it very clear, people in uniform are patriots, people not in uniform are equally big patriots. So there is no trust deficit, whatever. Many a time what happens is the people who are not in uniform or not in the government have a little less understanding of the processes and the kind of entanglements that we have. Let us say, I'll give you an example. Somebody says, I want an NCNC trial. Now that person is saying, because he's a user, he needs that solution. But he really doesn't have the funds for it. So he is hoping that the NCNC trial proves to be a success where he can reach out to his apex level and get that project sanctioned. So he's trying his level best to do something for the country. Believe me, the person who's doing it is not doing anything for himself. He's not going to get anything out of it except he has to slog a lot and he has to work a lot, and which is in addition to what he's supposed to be doing. It's beyond his charter also. So it's not the lack of trust or the disbelief. And believe me, there are people in uniform who want things to happen, and they also clearly identify who are the people not to be trusted. So it's not that they are so naive that they will trust everyone blindly. But overall, the aim of everyone is to contribute. Okay. So I would still request you to interact more, and these forums are extremely important to interact. And you would have seen that earlier, say go about 2 years back, there were very few officers in uniform attending these kind of events.
That's right.
Now you see, and it's not only the apex level. It's all people who are in that chain, who are attending, who are trying to integrate. People are exchanging ideas. I don't think you would have found anybody from the Ministry of Defense here. Here, Manik Anand and me, we both are here.
I understand that.
Yeah, so things are changing, maybe a bit slow. While I want to compliment all of you for being here and being so good an audience, before I wind up, including your question, I'll give 1 minute to each of the panel.
Thank you for this question. In fact, I have been wanting to just respond to Chaitanya. You see, your apprehension well taken that, somebody does something for defense, now it may not remain with you. You cannot really open up your strategy to, let's say, civilian sector, the thing that you alluded to. Now, probably things were happening in a particular manner because that was the flavor. There wasn't much defense being entrusted to the civilian side, so probably they were looking for profit. But moment you start entrusting, let's say, certain technology or certain thing to civilian side also, like General said, they'll respond, they will be equally, I don't think they will just fall for money, because making strategic things, I suppose, will be little different from making soaps and toothpaste, for which you will just, give it away for a higher profit. People will understand that this is something which is not to be given away, whatever be the margin of profit. I mean, that nationalism will be equally at stake for everyone. Thank you.
Well, absolutely, and especially in the space sector where people are usually very familiar with military culture and come from that universe and have no problem with having a different mindset. Let me add that the profit is an extraordinarily strong mechanism for delivering good products. In regards to what I said on visibility, again, it's up for you to decide what's in your interest, providing an idea to your commercial partners of what is your roadmap, what you want to buy in the future, gives you a better chance of having it on the table at some point in the future. Not everything should be disclosed, not everything can be disclosed, and not everything practically has to be disclosed for those good things to happen. Apart from that, civil, military, commercial, defense, it's a journey. Maybe India is at an earlier stage in that journey than other countries, but you've embarked on that journey. The breadth and depths of structural, institutional, regulatory reform in space is truly impressive, and I think you can only expect good outcomes from the policy measures that have been taken recently.
I don't remember talking about apprehension or trust in my intervention, but somehow it has come to me. But I'll tell you 2-3 things. In my analysis, I've always been very dry. That dryness comes from numbers. Numbers, beneficial ownership speaks a lot. who owns it, who's giving you the maximum contract speaks a lot about a certain company. Trust is a human issue. What we should focus now on is certification, standardization, and evaluation. Yesterday we had a conversation about ISRO offering its opening its doors for testing and evaluation. We have 150 plus startups coming. Will they be able to accommodate those slots? That's not possible. We had a startup here, we have a startup here amidst us, Manas2. They are trying to raise a testing infrastructure. They want some money for it in Mumbai. They don't want that their technology to be tested in ISRO because the ISRO infrastructure testing system is not suiting their requirements. What next? So you need to standardize the system that they are developing outside the ISRO premises. So I don't remember talking about apprehension.
Maybe what I thought you said that you give some, strategic insight to some startups and somebody who invests more money probably you may not want to
Okay. A big thanks to the entire panel, and one last point, especially for the services officers who are here. One of the issues which I have raised with the MOD is to create more testing centers. While there may be a testing center which DRDO has, but obviously some people want other people also to have, so that they have another option. So in my conversation with the Defense Secretary, and so we've decided that DGQA will set up 3 such testing centers. Now it's for the users to structure it. What exactly do you want to be tested? How? What are the parameters that you want? Because unless you give it, then DGQA will again imagine what is an elephant or what is an animal. So it's for the user, and if you do it with consultation with the manufacturers, designers and developers, I think it will solve a lot of problems. So please join me in giving a huge round of applause to the panel. And this applause is to the audience also. Thank you so much.
So request you to please stay for a picture. Yes. Thank you so much for that stimulating discussion, and the audience as well for that active participation. I'm sure there's a lot left to discuss, but we encourage you to take that offline in the networking tea and lunch break. Though we don't have a lot of time left for the current tea break going on. We restart our sessions at 12. In track 1, we have the session on revisiting space laws for new space. In track 2 here, we'll have applications enabled by satellite PNT capability. Track 3, we'll have leading with innovation satellites for B2B and B2C video. And in the last one, we have May the force be with you. So, thank you so much for your participation, everyone. We'll see you around.